Hello, this is Daryl Ehrlich, and this is the Billings Gazette's Vietnam Voices, a project of the Billings Gazette sponsored by Master Lube, and today is February 1st, 2016. I am happy to be in the studio today with Larry Armstrong. Larry, thanks so much for being here. It's a pleasure. Larry served in the U.S. Navy from 1970 to 1974, was also a part of the Montana National Guard, and also a part of the reserves, too, after that. So he has had a long career with the armed services, and so I want to thank you for coming here and sharing your story today, Larry. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
It's an honor to be here and to be able to give my story. A lot of the people that I have known since I've gotten out of the military have wondered about my whole time of being on active duty and in the reserve program, and so this is my time to be able to kind of do a blanket sharing for everybody.
Yep. That's exactly what that's for. Well, let's start. 1970, you told me that you were on a kind of deferred, so late 1969. Let's walk before that point. Where were you and what were you doing before you joined the Navy? Let's talk about that.
Well, I was a typical teenager. Graduated from high school in '69 out of Billings West High School. And then I left home right away, right after I graduated. And some friends of mine and I went over around Circle and Brockway area to some farms and ranches and did some farming. I stayed on with a family there for about 3 months, and then came back to Billings. Well, got into a little bit of trouble with the law, which is typical, of teenagers. And so I remember being up before the judge and him saying, well, Larry, you can either spend 45 days in jail or you can go into the military. He said, you got your choice. And I said, well, I'll just go ahead and go into the military. I did not tell him that I had already signed up for the military.
But that was a choice. We've heard these apocryphal stories of people being given the choice of go sign up for that or go to jail, but that was an actual thing.
That in my case, I had already enlisted. I knew that the draft was out there. I'd already had to sign up for the draft, and so I just thought, well, hey, I don't want to be drafted. I don't want to go into the Army,
right?
So, or the Marine Corps. So I had heard horror stories about that already. My dad was in the Army, or in World War II, over in Germany on a quad mount.
Okay.
And so him and his younger brother both spent time over there, and so my older brother was already in the Navy. He joined, I believe, in '68, the year before I graduated, and so he had already been in, and he was in a air squadron, the VAW 114, and so whenever his squadron would be activated or deployed, I should say, then they would go aboard the USS Kitty Hawk, and then my younger brother. This is skipping ahead a little bit, but then my younger brother, when he went in on active duty, he went aboard the Kitty Hawk as ship's company, and he was a chaplain's assistant. So they were because they were in different rates and different. My older brother being a part of an air wing, he didn't get to see a lot of my younger brother. So once in a while they would see each other on the mess decks or whatever, but. So, but anyway, for me, I went ahead and went into boot camp in March of 1970, and boot camp for me was something that I would have liked to have just stayed there. Why?
I have not heard that. Yeah. Larry, I've heard a lot of things about boot camp. Wanting to stay there is not one of them. Why?
It was very unusual. And I've talked with I don't know how many people since then, and they say, "Oh, boot camp, oh man." Well, for me, I was scared. I remember I had kind of a little bit longer hair, and not real long hair, but I had longer hair, and I just remember going, one of the things that I remember going into boot camp was going in there, we were all in a big long line, going into the barber shop. And the guys coming out of the barbershop, everybody, some of them got really long hair,
Right.
and they're going in there, you know, and they're proud of their hair, and they go in there and they come out and they are shaved, and there's guys crying. I mean, that was just something that just stuck in my memory from boot camp. But so we went in, and one of the things I just remember that sticks in my memory is when the reveille happened. They would come in with a nightstick, and we had the corrugated garbage cans, and they would come in and they would take that baton and they would just around inside there. Oh man, and it was so loud, and everybody would just bail out and hit the floor. But so after about the beginning of the third week, the recruiters for the color guard came around, and the CO of the color guard said, anybody here who wants to be in the color guard can volunteer. Now the prerequisite is you have to be able to march. You have to know how to march and be able to keep time to the drums. Well, I figured, hey, I've always been able to march pretty good, so I raised my hand, and few others in there raised their hand, and so they did this from each of the rifle companies. I had no idea what the color guard was, and so when I got in there, the CO says, okay, this is what we do, and what it is, it's 50 guys that carry all 50 of the state flags, and then there is a color string of 6 individuals, a rifleman on each end, and then you have the Navy flag, and I believe it was the Minuteman flag, and the ensign, and I think it was our company flag. And so these guys, these 6 individuals marched out ahead, and the only reason why I'm telling this part of it is because I happened to end up being part of the color string. Now that was kind of the elite of the elite. Those are the individuals that could really march well and keep really good time. And so I was chosen by all the rest of the people in our company to be what we call the recruit chief petty officer. We had petty officers and we had first class petty officers in our company, and then everybody else was just really much nothing.
Right.
So the recruit chief petty officer was, of course, in charge of the guys that were the 56 guys that were in the boot camp company, and so everybody got together and they voted. And I don't even know how this came about. It's just been too long ago. I don't remember how this came about, but everybody voted for me to be the recruit chief petty officer. And there was a black guy that was in there, a really nice guy. They voted him as the first class. Well, this guy, upon talking with him, he said that he wanted to be the recruit chief, and if I wanted to, I didn't have to, but if I wanted to let him be the chief, and that I would be the first class. I talked it over with the CO, and he said he didn't have a problem with that. Well, so I went and I talked with we called him our CPO, the recruit chief petty officer of another company, who was ahead of us, and I said, what are the duties of the recruit chief and what are the duties of the first class? And he told me what they were, and I don't think this other guy, I don't believe that he checked at all, but I did my homework, and so I found out that the recruit chief had some pretty tough duties, and that a lot more was expected of him than what was expected of the first class. But the first class got all the benefits of the chief. The benefits being everybody of the other 50 guys in there, they wanted to get on our good side so that they could get free perks, or and they would shine our shoes, they would make up our racks, they would wash our clothes, they would press them. I mean, we that's why I wanted to stay in boot camp. And when we got to March and everything, and then the CO picked out the 6 guys for the color string. And I got to have my choice of what I wanted to do in the color string, being I was a petty officer, and I got to wear the 3 stripes here as a first class. But I decided that I thought it would be kind of neat to be able to carry the ensign, the American flag, and so that's what I did. And we had to march. We had this pocket things that we would stick the bottom of the flag in, and we would have to rip this flag like this and put your thumb right up to your nose and have your elbows touching each other. And that's the way we marched as the color string. We had to be touching our elbows at all times, marching like that. And it was not easy, but we were closest to the band was right ahead of us, and so we got to be pretty close to the guy with the drums, and so we could hear that and be able to keep cadence. And it was kind of cool that when we would come up and make a 90-degree corner, the color string did it different. We had to come up, and we were a little ways ahead of the 50 all-state flag team. We would come up and we would have to march time and march and pivot, and we would pivot and just all pivot around, keep him march, and then all step out on the same foot and continue marching. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. We got to march in a Padres halftime game while we were there, so it was a good move on my part to go into the color guard, because we marched in one other parade. I remember that. As a rifle team, you were stuck. You were stuck there for the whole 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And so we got to go off base and do stuff. So that
that was basic, and you like that because someone else had to shine the shoes. I don't blame you. Did you, when you were, let's jump back just a little, when you were kind of looking at the choice of going into jail or going into the service, did the prospect of what was going on in Vietnam scare you, or because your brothers were in it, were you concerned at all, or where was your mind then?
You know, I was not. I actually did not really think about that. I actually, I'll back up a little bit. When I went down to the recruiter to talk to the recruiter about going in, my dad was a teamster, but he did a lot of equipment operating, and there was a couple summers where I got to go out on the construction and stay with him and watch him either drive truck or operate equipment. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the idea of operating equipment. And so I asked the recruiter if I could go into the Seabees. I told my older brother what I wanted to do, and he said, when you go down there, talk to him about that. He said, in fact, he picked me up this insignia. Well, no. Yeah. I think that's the insignia right there. I think that's a caterpillar right there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he picked me up this insignia to be able to sew onto my uniform. Well, they had a different idea for me. But no, I don't recall having ever been concerned at all about going over to Vietnam. I knew about it, but it just never occurred to me that I might be in any danger.
Okay. So then after boot camp, then what?
Well, after boot camp, and there again, I recall so vividly sitting in the bleachers on both sides of this field, and the people down there, the personnel that would assign people, the recruits, where we were going to go, calling us down one by one, they had these tables lined up down there, and going in to or going down there to see where we were going to be assigned to. And so I was one of the last ones called, and I walked down there, and he hands me the paperwork, and he says, "You will be going to Signalman A School, and then you will be given an assignment after that." And I said, "What is a signalman?" And he said, "Well, a signalman is the guys that do all the flashing light and the hand waving and stuff."
Right. Yeah.
And I said, "Well, my recruiter," and as soon as I said that, he says, "I don't care what your recruiter told you. This is what you're going to do." There was no arguing
Wow.
with him. Nowadays, I mean, I've read and heard of guys that said that they signed a contract. I never signed a contract, not that I recall.
Right.
So they just.
That had to be kind of disappointing. You thought you were going to do one thing, and
Well, in all actuality, I believe the good Lord was shining his countenance upon me back then, because had I gone into the Seabees, I more than likely would have gone right over to Vietnam. And I have talked to a number of people over the years that had said, the recruiter or the people down there probably did you a favor being aboard a ship, even though the ship that I was on was a horrible riding ship. It was flat bottom, and it was just terrible. But I was just kind of, I was very disappointed. I thought, I was looking forward to being a CB and running equipment. But here I was thinking, I'd be in the States. I mean,
Right.
we're playing around on the bases and stuff with equipment. But
Right, yeah. So let's talk about training for signalmen and all of that. Tell me about that. What's that like?
Well, this is what I looked like after I got out of boot camp. And then, once I was out of boot camp, then they told me I was going to be going to Signalman A School for 3 months. And we were right there in San Diego, going to A School, right there at 32nd Street. And so I had to learn all these flags and pennants. And we would hoist these up on the yard arms of the ship, on the mast, which this is the ship that I went aboard. This is the mast up here. And we would hoist those flags up on those yard arms. And it was a pretty difficult rate to learn, because we had to learn Morse code. We had to learn what each of these flags were, the phonetic alphabet, and what the pennants meant, and then learn Morse code at the same time using flashing light rather than sound. And from what I have talked with other people over the years, is that going by sound was a lot easier than doing it by flashing light. And so with the flashing light, we would signal back and forth to each other. But these flags here, they were call signs or messages from one ship to the other. And I thought, well, I'm going to be a signalman. I mean, I wanted to be, hey, if I'm going to go aboard a ship, I want to be on a gun where I can shoot something.
Yeah.
And so we were called glorified bosun's mates, or another common term was skivvy wavers, because of these flags here.
Right.
And so we would have to be up on the signal bridge all the time, and that was our duty space. And A School was tough, but for 3 months it went by pretty quickly. And then once A School was over, then they said, okay, these are your orders. You're going aboard the USS Tuscaloosa. It's a brand new ship, brand new LST, and you will be commissioning the ship. And I thought, oh boy, brand new ship. Oh, like getting a brand new car.
Right.
Not so much.
Well, tell me about that. Let's talk about the Tuscaloosa, right?
USS Tuscaloosa, LST 1187. It's part of what they call a Gator Navy.
Okay.
And
Tell me about that turn.
It would have been cool to have been like Doug Braun on board a carrier, but being in the Gator Navy, there was different kinds of acronyms that they would give to the different ships. One, believe it or not, was actually called an LSD. The LST, that stood for Landing Ship Tank. The LSD stood for Landing Ship Dock. And then they had another one called a LPD, Landing Platform Dock, and a LKA that stood for assault. It had boats on it that they would lower over the sides. Well, once I got aboard the ship, right there in San Diego where we were home ported, they said, you're going to be going up to a little town called Vallejo up by San Francisco. And you get to go under the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, I thought, well, I'm just a Montana boy. That sounds pretty cool.
Right.
And it was kind of cool going underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And so we went over there, and they had the change of command, or I mean, not change of command, but the commissioning ceremony. And I thought, okay, well, here goes. Boy, 3.5 years aboard this thing. And at first, I didn't think anything too much about the way that the ship rode until, after I'd been on there for a little while, and we got off the coast of San Francisco, and we got into a storm. At night, it was not very much fun. It was cold, I remember that. And with the ship tossing and turning, we were chasing a submarine out there is what we were doing. Of course, they didn't know that this storm was going on up there, and we're doing sonar testing with them. And for a couple of days, we chased this submarine around. Well, that was the only time that I ever lost my cookies. Mm-hmm. That night, I just remember I couldn't handle it anymore. It was dark up there. I was all by myself, and I just remember going down to the captain's bathroom. They called them heads. And I went down there, and I
lost it.
I did. Oh, man, that was horrible. I think I found out right then that I was not going to do so good.
In rough sea?
In rough seas, yeah. As long as it was pretty smooth sailing, I did just fine. But there was about 2 or 3 times where I got pretty nauseated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
No.
So how many people were on the Tuscaloosa? What's the crew?
There was a ship's crew, if I remember right, about 250 people is all.
Okay.
And then when we had the Marines aboard, and that's what this ship was designed for, was to carry Marines and their equipment. We would have, I think, probably about 200 Marines aboard. So we were about 450 people.
So this was designed for taking troops up and moving troops around, right? On land, right? More than, is it land or sea, or how does that work for an LSD?
Well, we would take their equipment on. I can't remember if we took any equipment on when we left the States. We went on two 9-month tours of duty. We call them Westpacks, West Pacific tours of duty. And I don't recall if we took any equipment on and Marines. I don't think we did, from what I remember. I think that we got like over to the Philippines or over to Vietnam. We would take on. We could have. I just don't recall that. But our purpose was, as you mentioned, to be able to land these Marines on a shore, like the shore of Vietnam, if they ever wanted us to, though we never did. Would be to. This ship was designed actually to go right up to the edge of the shore, and it had tanks in the back that you could ballast down to get the bow up out of the water. And these derrick arms right here, there's 2 ramps here. There was a ramp that sat on top of the deck, and then a ramp that sat underneath there. And the inside of the ship was hollow. And we would carry equipment down there, usually what they called landing vehicle tanks. They were like a tank, only they were a personnel carrier. They didn't have a turret or anything on them. And I guess they would have been more like a Bradley, like a seaworthy Bradley. They were watertight. And they would come off the back of the ship. The stern ramp back here would drop down like on a pickup. and it would drop down, and these things would go off, and they would go completely underwater and then come back up, and then they were full of, probably carried, I don't know, 8, 10 people in each vehicle, and they would motor on into the beach. But we also had the capability of going right up on the beach. We could haul like Jeeps and deuce and a halves, and you know, they didn't have Humvees back then. This was before the Humvees, so they had just the Jeeps and trucks and stuff, and they would go ahead and lower this main deck or ramp here. It would come out, and that's why this stuck out here that had cables on it would pull this out, and it would go down onto the beach, and so they could drive the vehicles right up out of the tank deck or off the main deck and go right down onto the beach. And
so what was a new boat like? What was it like a new car?
It was like a new car. It had a lot of things wrong with it, and we did a 45-day turnaround. I believe, if I remember right, that was my first trip over to Hawaii. We did testing for 45 days, and do a shakedown cruise to see how much stuff was wrong with the ship. And just like anything else new that you get, there's usually always something wrong with it. With a big ship like this, I mean, it was 575 feet long.
Right.
So I mean, it wasn't like a carrier or anything, but it was still a pretty good sized ship, and it had a lot of stuff wrong with it. And in fact, we operations, which was the signalman, the radioman, and the radarman, and quartermasters. And I think that was all like 4 different rates in the operations. We all got stuck in a crew space at first for our berthing. Well, they found out right away that there was too many people in operations to be able to fit in even a couple of the crew spaces. So some of us got moved over to a troop space, and that, at first, I thought, this is not going to be good. This is I back up just a tad bit. This is a plank owner certificate I got when I found out that I was going to be a plank owner of the ship and the first crew aboard this particular vessel. But anyway,
describe for those people who don't understand what a plank owner is. Describe that.
A plank owner, back in the old days when ships had wooden decks, when they decommissioned a ship, the Navy would actually cut off a piece of the plank, and they would send it to anyone who was a plank owner. And as a plank owner, I thought, well, hey, when they decommission a ship, I'll get a piece of steel.
Right.
No. I went online, and I had to look up what a plank owner actually was, and they said that it's just not really practical for them to be sending pieces of steel to everybody who was aboard a ship. So.
Right. So you did that. Let's talk about how did you get over to after 45 days? Then it's put into, I'm guessing, after the bugs are worked out or the things that need correcting are corrected. Then how did you get over to Southeast Asia and Vietnam? Tell me about that.
Well, on both of our the 45-day turnaround, we didn't make it all the way over there, so that was the shakedown cruise. But then our first deployment, I believe, was sometime in the latter part of 1970, and I remember we spent one winter over there. But we would take off from the States, and it took, if I remember, 10, 11 days to get over to Hawaii. And everybody pretty much goes to Hawaii. That's our first stopping point. Some had gone to Midway, some gone to Wake Island, but we never saw those 2 little small islands. We just went directly right over to Hawaii, and usually you end up with some liberty there, and then you would leave from there. And from what I remember, we usually went to either one of 2 places. We would either go to Subic Bay or Longapo in the Philippines,
Okay.
or we would go to Okinawa, which is north of Taiwan, if I remember right. And Taiwan is north of the Philippines, as I found out looking on the map because I had forgot.
Right.
But one particular time I remember coming out of Hawaii, and I think there were 9 ships in our squadron, and I just remember this very vividly. Beautiful blue-green water, just beautiful. And the flying fish. And I've said this a lot of times where, oh yeah, flying fish. No, they really were flying fish. They look kind of like a dragonfly when they would come up. And they would flutter along, and then land back in the water. And they might be out of the water for 4, 5, 6 seconds. Well, I just remember that the USS Mobile, LKA 115, and I remember like almost like yesterday, was on our right. And they were probably, I suppose, 200-300 yards out. And then either the Denver or the Monticello, if I remember right, Denver LPD 9, was off to our left. And these both ships were built kind of more like a cruise ship. I mean, they're big, high bows on them and rounded bottoms. Well, this ship that we had, as I showed you the picture, it was kind of blunt in front. It had what they call the cruiser hull up to about 20 feet off the waterline, and then these big, huge, heavy bow doors were angled a little bit, but it was blunt. And the seas were probably only about 20 feet high on the swells, and quite a ways in between the swells, the trough in there. And I just remember it was just pathetic. I tried to get off the ship so many times. I would put in orders, and they would get turned down and get turned down. I just wanted off the ship because I just remember that particular time how nice these other ships rode. They would just be cutting the water just so beautifully. We're over there, and every time we'd hit a wave, it's just like taking your hand and just hitting the water like that. It would just, the sound I make is kawak, because it would just spill up over the bridge or the bow, and we would literally get wet standing 200 feet back from the bow on the signal bridge, and just dousing the signal bridge with salt water.
Right.
And just frustrating.
Rough riding.
It was very rough riding.
So what's a signalman do when you're at it when you're on not on a turnaround or not turnaround when you're not on a kind of a shakedown when you're working? What's an average day like? What do you do during an average day?
Well, our days were a lot of times they were kind of mundane. We would do pretty much the same thing from day to day. Going over to Hawaii and then going from there to Subic Bay or Okinawa, that was kind of our easy time. We didn't have to stand watches or anything because there was no threat. But once we got over to the Philippines, we spent some time touring up and down the Gulf of Tonkin and the South China Sea. We did our fair share of going up and down there. I mean, we weren't, it was just more for, I don't know, I guess to me it was always like a waste of fuel because I mean, I guess if they would have needed the Marines and their equipment that we had on board, we could have just gone right in, and within, probably 12, 14 hours, we would have been at the beach to be able to unload the Marines and their equipment. But so I guess that's probably the reason why we would go up and down. We saw other ships a lot of times, I mean, going up and down, but my average day was just going up the signal bridge, and we did a lot of training with all these flags and the semaphore and the flashing lights. We were in formation with maybe, we didn't usually all travel. Once we got over there, we would split up, and so a lot of times we were by ourselves, but a few times we would be with another ship, and so we would use the flashing light to be able to to signal back and forth to the other ship. And as I mentioned, it was just a lot of training, just a lot to learn from this rate. And I do remember on that one particular time when we called it steaming, even though all the ships were run on with diesel engines. But we were steaming in formation, and the Denver, if I remember right, they were the head ship. They had the commander on board, and so they would initiate these signals where these flags right here. This is me standing up on the signal bridge. This is the signal shack right here, and you can barely see these flag bags over here. But the lanyards, they would go down. There was, if I remember right, there was 4 of them, and we would hoist these flags up on here, and the flags and pennants, they would be put up in a certain order, and then you'd have to go to a manual and look those up in that manual to see what they meant.
Okay.
And so the lead ship would initiate the signal. Everybody else on both sides would go ahead and send up the same signal, and then when that ship, the lead ship, would say execute, then they would bring theirs down real fast, and all the other ships would bring all theirs down all at the same time. And it looked pretty cool. It was pretty impressive. The first time that ever happened, I thought, wow, this is pretty neat.
Right. What did those, give me an idea of what did those signals or the messages that you were sending back and forth in Morse code, what were they?
Well, they, in these manuals, they could mean different things. I mean, the pennants meant one thing, the alphabetic flags and the number flags would mean something else. And it could mean speed up. It could mean speed up to a certain amount of knots, or it could mean we're going to do a maneuver where all the ships are going to turn 20 degrees to port or 20 degrees to starboard. And when he would execute that, if it meant that we were going to turn, we didn't ever do a 180, but we would do, but we would do, turns, and it was pretty neat because the whole idea behind the signalman rate was in case of a combat situation where you had enemy aircraft or even other enemy boats in the area, they might have to go to radio silence. And so we as signalmen would take over the communications from one ship to the next. I mean, it would be total radio, no kind of radio silence or radio communication whatsoever. They would turn off all the radar, and you couldn't do it at night, even though we could signal one another at night, though.
Sure.
We had these hoods. They call them a hood. They look kind of like a Abe Lincoln top hat is what they looked like.
Okay.
And they were red filtered, and so you'd put those on, and then you could signal the ships at night. Though we never did anything like, obviously you couldn't do the flags at night.
Right.
But we could signal each other at night with those flashing lights, and so.
Yeah, that was one of my questions was why not just use a radio or the radio, radar, whatever to communicate. But this was practice, and this is when you couldn't.
Right. Yeah. Probably 95% of the communication of the official type of communication was done with radios. But once in a while, for an exercise, they would shut off the radios, and then it was all up to the signalman to be able to maneuver the ships, and they wanted to just test that out to see if we were actually able to maneuver these 9 ships out there at sea in formation.
Right.
And to communicate with each other and to communicate in a professional manner.
Yeah. Was it, did you like the work?
Yeah, I kind of did. It was kind of a neat deal to be on the topmost level of the ship. It probably would have been a lot more prestigious had I been aboard a carrier or been aboard a destroyer or well, battleships. The last one, we had a signalman come aboard our ship that came off the New Jersey. To go from a battleship as a signalman aboard an LST, it was like, wow, the ultimate demotion.
Right. Yeah.
but it as a rate, it was probably pretty good. We spent a lot of time painting, chipping paint if it started coming loose, cleaning of the signal bridge, always constantly cleaning the salt water off, doing freshwater washdowns. And but the rate, because it was kind of interesting, I got to have, the thing about it is I got to have 3 squares a day. And had I gone into the Seabees, I probably would have been over Vietnam. I probably would have been staying in the barracks, and I would have been maybe under fire at times. There was only one time when we were off the coast of Vietnam, and I was on watch that particular night, and I saw a tracer round come over the top of our ship. We must have been pretty close to the coast. And I just remember seeing this tracer round come right across the top of the ship and land in the water. And another time we went, this is one of my stories that being over there, we would get liberty in different places. We had liberty in a couple of different ports in Japan, as I said, Okinawa, a couple of different ports in Taiwan. We went to Hong Kong a couple times, and Thailand once. And we were on our way down to Australia for liberty. And I just remember, I had to actually look it up on that map. I traced out a map of that country, or that part of the world over there. And I remember, I thought that it was a long ways. And maybe we had come from Japan, or maybe we had come from Taiwan or somewhere to where we were going down to Australia. I was thinking that we probably, more than likely, had come from our port over there in the Philippines. Well, it's not really a long ways from Olongapo down to the equator, as I found out. I just remember it seemed like we were underway for quite some time before we got orders to turn around. Well, I don't know if anybody's said anything to you about what you do when you go across the equator. You go from being a polywog to a shellback, and there's a initiation, and it varied from ship to ship as to what these initiations were like for the polywogs to become a shellback. Well, after they told us what some of the things that they did, I really did want, I wanted no part of that. One of the things that stuck in my mind was that they would take the laundry bags, which were usually about 2 feet in diameter, and they would take and cut the ends out and then have somebody aboard the ship sew those together. And so you might have a 10, 20, 30 foot long chute of these things being all sewed together, and then they would fill them with garbage from the mess decks. They would throw that in there, and then you would have to, as a polywog, you would have to crawl through that thing, and they would take hoses, and they didn't hit you real hard, but they would smack you as you had to crawl your way through all that garbage from one end of that thing to the other. And it was just things like that I just, there were horror stories, and I just thought, I don't want any part of this. And I told some of the other signalmen, I said, when we get a day away from the equator and they're talking about doing this, I'm going down to the mess decks and I'm going to get me enough food to last for a couple days. I'm going up to the signal bridge and I'm locking myself in the signal shack. And they ain't coming up to get me. Right. But so anyway, we got close, and I think we were within a half a day of the equator, and we got turned around. We got orders to do an unrep. They called it an underway replenishment, an unrep with an ammo ship, and we were to take on ammo and go up the Mekong River.
Okay.
And I was thinking, whoa. Okay, by that time I knew, hey, there's fighting up the Mekong River, the Mekong Delta. And I thought, this is probably not going to be good. Well, so we did this underway replenishment with this ammo ship, and we went up the Mekong River. I seem to remember we had gone up there for like 12 hours. And so we must have gone a long ways up there until it got too narrow for us to go any further, that we had to get turned around. And then these gunboats or whatever they were, they came up and alongside of us, and then they offloaded all the ammo onto the gunboats. And we were, I remember we were at general quarters for probably, I'm thinking most of the way up the river. So for 12 or 20 hours, I don't remember how long it was, but we were at general quarters. They would come around with brown bags and give everybody lunch and dinner and stuff, because the mess decks were closed. And so that was, I just remember looking up, and it was at night, part of it. I remember watching the tracers going back and forth across the river. We were close to the fighting.
Yeah, and you're carrying a load full of ammo, right?
We are. You know, I think back on that now, and I think, whoa. I mean, here we're sitting on a powder keg, but I guess back then and too, where they put that ammo was the deck right below the signal bridge, and I guess I just didn't think about it that much back then. I didn't think that I was really in that much danger.
Right.
But we were. I mean.
So, what do you recall about Vietnam going up the Mekong River?
Well, I just remember it was pretty wide at first, of course, and then as it got narrower and narrower, we were on full alert for snipers or anybody, and I just remember feeling kind of exposed being up there.
Because you're up in the signal, your general quarters are signal deck?
Yeah, and so we're up there, and we have, in the front of the ship, up on the bow area, there was walls up, bulkheads, if you want to call them, probably 4 or 5 foot high. And I just kind of remember kind of hunkering down behind those things, just 'cause. I mean, we never got shot at that I know of, but I just remember, hey, if anybody's going to shoot at me,
right,
they ain't going to get much of a shot.
Right. Right, they're gonna have to be really good, right?
Yeah.
So, so you go and then how is the ammo unloaded? You get to the point where the ship's not going up any further, and then do the Marines come in and unload it, or how does that work?
No, it was ship's company. The bosun mates, they would help the gunner's mates, and they would unload that stuff. You know, I don't recall. I mean, even though I was watching them, I don't recall how they actually offloaded that stuff. I don't know whether they did it with lines or if the patrol boat or whatever it was that we unloaded on was tied right up to our ship, and they could just kind of like, you know, hand it over there. I don't even remember what kind of stuff it was.
Right.
I don't think it was bombs. I think it was more like small arms fire. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of it. It was lots of cases of bullets and shells.
Yeah. What was how often did you guys have to take things up rivers or into Vietnam?
That was the only time.
Okay.
That was it. That's that one trip. And I do remember after we got out of there, they sent us over to Bangkok in Thailand for liberty. Kind of as a reward, maybe. I don't know.
Right. What was the Gulf of Tonkin like?
We were far enough usually away from the coast to where all you could see was just water. Okay. It was the Gulf of Tonkin is wide enough to where if you're out in the middle, you'll see other ships, but you won't see any land as a general rule. And so just like, pretty much like going anywhere else, we were constantly on watch. We had enough signalmen that we could stand. If I remember right, we would be, there was 7 of us, I think, signalmen, 7 or 8. And we would be standing 8-hour watches. So we would split us up into 3 groups. And so you'd stand an 8-hour watch and constantly alert all the time. you better stay alert, because every once in a while the CO or the XO or our head of the Department of Operations would sneak his way up onto the signal bridge, and you better not be up there sleeping.
Right. Well, so how did you keep alert? Because our signal's changing that quickly that it needs constant tending, or how does that work?
No, it was, it was probably more for if we were in formation with another ship, or to be able to signal those guys in case we needed to do a maneuver. But in a way, with looking back on it, it just doesn't seem like, as a signalman, that our job was really that important at night. Mm-hmm. But yet they had to stand 24-hour watches.
And did you, so how did you pass the time? How did you not fall asleep, yeah?
Well, there was usually at least a couple of us up there at one time, and so it was keeping each other awake is what amounted to, talking and doing semaphore. With we had flashlights with cones on them with red. They were red, and so we could stand up on the signal bridge and we could practice semaphore with each other to get better at it. Because a lot of times when we were in formation with another ship, some of the officers learned semaphore, and so they would come up there and they would send a semaphore back and forth, either to the other signalman on the other ship or maybe to another officer that wanted to learn semaphore. Okay. And so it was a good thing to know. And of course, some of those guys were really fast. I mean, I got pretty fast at it, but I was never as fast as some of those guys. They would send semaphores so fast that you couldn't hardly read it. I mean, their hands were just a blur. And so it was pretty hard sometimes. So you wanted to get good at it. The better you got at it, the better you could communicate with somebody else that was aboard another ship.
What did you? Now you're up above everyone, so you've got a pretty good view. What's your view of wherever you're sailing to, or steaming to, I should say, not sailing, but steaming to? You have a great view of everything, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much an unobstructed view of everything that's going on around us, and that was one of the things about being a signalman that I kind of really liked, being able to see everything that was going on. And that was, if I'd have been an engineman, where I was down in the bottom of the ship, down where the engine room, you didn't get to see anything unless you ventured up. And there was times when we had people from other rates come up to the signal bridge because they just wanted to be able to see what was going on. And so I did, and in that respect, I did like being a signalman, being able to be up there. But as I mentioned before, when we were getting rough seas.
So let's talk about what's the scariest part of your time as a signalman?
I don't recall much of anything being scary. I just don't. I suppose if there would have been enemy aircraft that had been over there flying around, I might have been worried, but that just was not the case. So as far as dangers, other than like that trip up the Mekong, I just didn't feel like we were in any.
Did you ever worry about weather? I mean, was there anything that you thought the weather was too extreme?
There was, as Doug mentioned also, there was a time when we went up by Korea, and in fact, I don't know, well, I have some pictures of that, but we had one shore landing where we did in Japan, and I just remember coming in. I was on watch that morning, and I was glad that I was. And I remember coming in, and we were headed like straight into the shore, and Mount Fuji was over here. And as the sun, I was just telling the other guy downstairs, as the sun hit Mount Fuji, shining on it, it turned to orange, and that was so cool to see Mount Fuji, just more and more and more of it appear as we got closer to the shore. Well, it was cold that morning. I mean, it was really cold. And I don't think it snowed then, but as we left, it started snowing aboard the signal bridge. And I remember all of us scraping up a whole bunch of snow and building a snowman up there and put one of our hoods on top as a top hat. Right. I can't believe I never got any pictures of some of that kind of stuff. But yeah, you would go, and Doug Braun was he attested to that. Looking at his video, that same thing. You would be up there, and it might be cold enough to snow, so it probably 20, 25 degrees. Going from that temperature, in 2 days later, you're down to the Philippines, and it's 120 degrees in the shade. I mean, it just
right.
The temperature extremes were, and most of the time, 90% of the time, it was dealing with temperatures that were really hot.
Yeah.
But again, that was one of the advantages of being on the signal bridge, that you had breezes blowing all the time to where it wasn't horribly hot, especially if you could get in the shade somewhere.
Right. What did you miss about Montana the most?
Well, I guess kind of like my freedom. I mean,
tell me, say a little bit more about that.
As a civilian, I mean, you can pretty much go anywhere you want, do anything you want. Where over there, I mean, especially when we were on these 9-month Westpacks, you're sure when you got to a port, you were somewhat free to go where you wanted to, but so much of the time was spent aboard the ship, and you were just in one spot, the signal bridge, all the time. And I just remember being away from home. Most of the guys were probably homesick. I mean, they just would have rather have been at home than over there. But I just remember that I was homesick.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. Was there any cure for that?
Just other than writing letters and getting letters, that was always a pretty joyful time.
Yeah.
Getting stuff from home, and then writing a lot of letters.
And you had two brothers who were in the Navy too.
I had two brothers. My younger brother was aboard the Kitty Hawk as ship's company, and my older brother was in an air wing. I think I might have mentioned that. And so one time I was aboard the ship, and I happened to know from talking with other people that the Kitty Hawk was coming in to Subic Bay, and I thought, well, this is pretty cool. Yeah, I got two brothers aboard the same ship, and they're coming in. So it was pretty neat that I could get on the flashing light and talk to a carrier, because that didn't happen very often. So I got on the flashing light, and I was signaling back and forth to this carrier as they were coming in. And so I asked them where the ship was going to be being tied up at, what pier and we're at. And so I took a little jeepney over there and stayed on shore while everybody else, and there's so many people, it seemed like they were never going to come off. So finally one of them came off, and I don't know if they knew that I was there. And so I think it was kind of a surprise that I was there, standing there waiting for him to come off the ship. And I kind of wish that I'd gone aboard the ship and just had him give me a big tour of the carrier, but I don't know. For some reason, I didn't think about it. So we went, the three of us went over into Olongapo, and I don't know if you can see this picture very good, but we had a picture of the three of us taken in one of the bars over there, because that's pretty much what it was over there. There's just a lot of bars up and down Say Drive. I remember that. And it was pretty neat having my two brothers and I halfway around the world.
Right.
And being able to see each other. It didn't last for very long, but
it was worth it.
It was worth it.
So let's talk about So you missed that. What happened? You served for 4 years, 1974. Were you on the ship most of the time for those 4 years?
I was. I mean, other than the times when I would have leave or liberty, I mean, it was pretty much aboard that ship constantly, every day.
What's the is there any? What is there to do to kill time, or was there any time to kill when you're on ship?
While we were aboard the ship?
Yes.
Yeah, as I mentioned, just a lot of training, painting, cleaning, and just talking.
Yeah.
There were times. There was one time, well, several times that I do remember that some of the officers they would challenge those of us who were signalmen to flag raising exercises, raising those flags that I pointed out. They would be on one flag bag and we would be on another flag bag. And I use the term flag bag, that's what we called them. They were basically a big rectangular container with all these flags down in there, and each flag had a ring on one end and a snap hook on the other end. And so you would have a guy standing out in the middle, and he would be calling out these signals. I mean, and he would give the people on the flag bags maybe 2 or 3 seconds to get a flag and start hoisting it out of there. And sometimes there might be 4 or 5 flags in a row or more on one one lanyard. And so you might get three lanyards full of maybe 5, 6, 7 flags apiece, and then he would be calling these out. And so you have to know where those flags are. And I'm going to call them all flags. You had to know where in that flag bag they were, because you only had 2 or 3 seconds to be able to find your next flag, hook that on there from your last flag, and just keep on going. And you got one guy running them up, and the other guy going up and down the flag bag, which is about, I suppose they were 6 feet long, 7 feet long, and he's hooking all these flags in there, and you're running them up. Well, then the guy in the middle, when both teams get the flags up, then he would say execute. And so you'd let go, you'd have them tie it off as you were going. You'd release all 3 lanyards, and down those things would come. Then you've got about 3 minutes to stow all those flags before he started calling out the next signal. And if you had a whole bunch of flags sitting there on the deck and you're not ready, you're screwed. I mean, you're just not ready.
Right.
And it was so funny watching these officers, because they thought, I mean, hey, we're officers. We can do it better than the enlisted. And after about 3 or 4 times of calling out different signals, they would have a pile of flags over there that they had not had time to stow, or they had stowed them in the wrong place.
Right.
And so when they would run up the next signal, it would be the wrong flag or wrong pennant. I just remember that was kind of a fun time.
Yeah. So you challenge them and win.
Yeah. We would win most of the time.
Right. I can see. Well, if you did it every day, just because you're an officer doesn't mean you can do it better.
Yeah.
What? So tell me about 1974. Tell me about your exit from the Navy. How did that happen, and what was that like?
I remember we were over in the Philippines, and I was getting close to getting out, and so I didn't know if we were going to make it all the way back to the States before my time was up. And so we got to Hawaii, and they gave me the choice. They said, well, you got your choice. You can either take an aircraft back to the States, or you can stay aboard the ship and ride the ship back. And I knew that it would take us 10 or 12 days to get back, and I thought, I just want to be out. Well, I'm not so sure that turned out to be a real good decision, because we got put aboard, if I remember right, it was like a C-130, and the seats were facing backwards, and there was no heat back there. And I don't recall how long of a flight it was. Seemed like it was 12 hours or something. And sitting back there, facing backwards. We all were buried in blankets.
Wow, because that's really cold.
It was really cold back there, and there wasn't that many of us. Maybe I remember six or eight of us sitting back there. So we got into, I think they flew us up to like San Francisco, and we had to take a bus or something, or maybe it might have been a military bus. I don't remember, but back down to San Diego, and so I had to stay on the base there in San Diego for the whole time that it took the ship to finally come in. The only time I ever got to see the ship come in without me on it. And I was done, and I was out, processed out.
Was that did you consider going now? I mean, let's talk a little bit. You had a career in the military after that, but at that time in 1974, did you think about going for more, or did you just want out?
No, I think at that particular time I just wanted out.
Okay,
I had tried to get off that ship and tried, and I think I was ready to go home.
Yeah. Do you think your time, it was the time in the Navy, those 4 years, was that a good thing for you?
I think so. I think I got to see the Orient, which I probably would have never seen. I've never been over to Europe yet. And I don't know. With what's going on over there right now, I'm not so sure I really want to go. But
right.
Yeah, I think it was a positive experience. If I was given the choice of doing it over again, would I have? I don't know. I don't know if I could even answer that question. Probably, but I just remember it was. We had a lot of good times, but there was a lot of one particular thing that comes back to memory is one of the more fun times we had. We had these two guys come aboard the ship as signalmen, and one of them was from New Jersey and the other one was from New York. And these two guys, they were what we call cut-ups. They like to have fun. And one time we had Marines on board, and usually the Marines that were on board, about 25% of them were so sick all the time that they couldn't even make their way up to the mess decks to even eat. 50% of them probably were able to get up there once in a while to eat, and then 25% of them, it didn't bother them too much. Well, I just remember going through the mess decks, putting stuff on our trays, and the Marines had already gone in, and they had gone through the chow line first. And so we're going along, and I remember listening to one of these guys tell the other one, hey, let's get out there. When we get out there to a table, let's see if we can't all sit together. So I said, that sounds good. Well, when we got out there, there was no seats. Well, so the one guy says, I'm going to clear us a spot. We had succotash as the vegetable. So he took a big mouthful of the succotash. And he walked over there, and there was one seat at this table, and he sits down, and he goes, and he just let all that succotash fly out of there, all over his tray. And these Marines that were sitting there went, oh man, they cleared the whole table out. They all just left. We all got to sit down. That's the way these two guys were. They were just constantly doing that kind of stuff.
Well, did they? So what the experience was probably overall good for you?
I think so. I think that looking back on it now, I think that at the time it just seemed to drag on and on and on, and I thought, I am never going to get done. But of course, like anything else in life, you look back on it and go, wow, man, that really went by pretty doggone fast.
Right.
4 years. I mean, it's when you're living it day to day, it just seems like, man. But yeah, it went by. I mean, here I am, 65 years old now, and wow, I look back on life, and boy, it's gone by pretty fast.
Right. Tell me a little bit about when you were over there. Now, you're taking Marines and moving them around? Are they going to Vietnam? Are they going back, or how does that work when you're transporting them?
it just seems like we had them on our ship for quite a long time, especially when we were steaming up and down the Gulf of Tonkin. And
Okay.
the carriers, they would be out there for 30 days at a time, where I don't recall us being out there for no 30 days.
And so are you inserting troops different places, or are you transporting them, or how does that work?
I don't remember if we had the same contingent of Marines aboard all the time. I don't think so. I think that they would go aboard different ships, and so we would have different Marines at different times, and so we would be carrying them around for a while, and then we would unload them. Especially like if we were going to go from like the Philippines up to Taiwan for Liberty, they would unload theirs. They would unload them on base, and they would go over and they would stay on the base while we would stay aboard the ship. And
what did the atmosphere or the morale or kind of the feeling, did it change when the Marines were on ship rather than just having ship's crew?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, probably mostly for mess deck purposes, because I mean they could just go up there whenever they wanted to, and of course we had to stand watches, and then we would have a certain amount of time where we would have to go down there, and it just seemed like they were always in the way. I mean, I think that they were told, to spend more of their time down in the berthing spaces, but it just seemed like the passageways in those ships weren't very wide, and two people could pass easily down a passageway, but it just seemed like with the Marines on board, those passageways were always more full. And they would sometimes come up on the signal bridge, and the officers, I think, were allowed up there, but the enlisted, not so much. But I think the morale, would probably a little bit lower when the Marines were on, but not much.
Right. So tell me a little bit about now, looking back, more than not quite 50 years, but almost 50 years. How do you view the Vietnam War, and what are your thoughts having been over in that part of the world?
Well, I don't remember affecting me that much back then. I don't remember any of the, these, like the hippies and whoever, the flower children, that meeting people at airports, and like the Hare Krishnas, and
right,
and saying people were baby killers and whatnot. I never got any of that.
So when you got out of the service and were discharged, was it hard getting back to kind of the world?
I think the only part that was hard coming back to the world after, of course, I was over there and I got out, having been on a West Pacific tour, was it just seemed like coming back to Montana, to Billings, things just seemed like, wow, everything was in slow motion.
In what way? What do you mean by that? Yeah.
I mean, when I was over there, there was always seemed to be something going on. But then when I get back here, of course I had to find a job, but it just seems like it was really weird, I remember, to go back to driving. Even though I had a car down in San Diego when I was, when we were between West Pacific tours, I had a car down there, but it just seemed like for 9 months I didn't drive anything, and then to come back and then to drive from there up to here, it just seemed weird to drive again.
Do you did people treat you differently when you came back?
They didn't.
Okay, so
No.
it was pretty much. Did you feel that, or did family or friends feel that? I mean, 4 years is a long time, that you had changed, and if so, how?
Well, I'm sure I probably matured in looks and in thought, and I was obviously having gone through the military, more responsible and more adult-like. And so I do know one thing. I met the Lord while I was in the Navy, and so that changed my life dramatically. Came back here, and I was out for just a short time, and I happened to be going to a Bible study, and I met a young gal, and we hit it off, and I didn't know she was that much younger than me, but she was 6.5 years younger than me. And here I'm 24 years old, or 23 at the time, and I thought she was in college, but we ended up getting married
Right.
next year after I got out.
So what is the how did that impact your life? Let's talk about finding the Lord then, and probably an interesting place to meet the Lord, and then it seems like it may have changed part of the trajectory of your life.
Oh, it did. Oh, there's no doubt about it. My older brother was going to, I'm trying to think of the Navigators, and so it's a military Christian organization, and so he started going to that when he was down there in San Diego, or North Island, and so he was the actual one that prayed with me to lead me to the Lord. And I remember it didn't make a real dramatic effect. I mean, I didn't get up and jump around or anything like that. I kind of stayed the same for a while. And then another thing that happened was one of the signalmen that came aboard the ship, he was from Minnesota, and he was a Christian. And then his cousin, who was like a third-degree black belt in karate, came aboard the ship, and they were cousins, and they were both Christians. And between those two guys, they just kept after me. And I just remember I was a smoker when I got into the Navy, and I just remember one time Daniel Anderson, that was the guy from Minnesota, he said, Larry, he said, you're probably not going to be a real effective witness for the Lord if you are standing there smoking a cigarette and blowing smoke in the guy's face.
Right.
He says, you really do need to quit. And I told him, I said, well, I really want to quit. And so I prayed about it long and hard, and I did quit. I remember that was like yesterday. I was over at their house. We were in between the two Westpacks, and I was with Dave Martz, was the black belt, and his wife. They had an apartment, and Dan, and we were sitting there, and I even remember, it's so vivid. I was on the end of the couch, and Dave was in the middle, and his wife was on the other end, and Dan was sitting in a chair. Well, I had caught a cold, and I wanted to quit, but I just couldn't give them up. And every time when I would quit, I would turn to menthol cigarettes. So back then it was Salem. And so I remember I had about 2 or 3 cigarettes left in the pack, and I was sitting there smoking. And they allowed, back then it wasn't as big of a deal as it is now for the secondhand smoke. And so sitting there smoking, and then I started coughing. And I've told this, we belong to a community group here in Billings for Faith Chapel, and I've told those other guys this story just the other night. I said I started coughing, and I was coughing, and one cough, just like perpetual motion. I just couldn't stop coughing, and I just cough and cough, and I probably 3 or 4 or 5 minutes I was coughing, and I thought I was going to pass out. I mean, I couldn't catch my breath, and I already had a sore throat, and it was just tearing my throat up. And I just remember when I finally was able to stop coughing, and I sat there for probably 4 or 5 seconds, and I said to those guys, and of course it really hurt to even talk, I said, that's it. That's the last cigarette I'm ever smoking in my whole life. I took the rest of that package, I scrunched it up, and I threw it in the ashtray, and I never, ever went back to cigarettes ever again. 10 years it took. 10 long years before I was ever finally over them completely.
Yeah. No, that's not a surprising story. So when you got back, you had changed, but for the better?
For the better, for sure.
Did people notice that change?
You know, I do believe so. I do believe so. I mean, going out to bars just didn't interest me at all. And my vocabulary changed. I no longer really needed to use the F word. And when I had gone into the Navy, I mean, I was never a real one for doing a lot of swearing, but my language just cleaned up, and I think I just had a better outlook on life.
Yeah. So let's talk about, one of the reasons we're doing this project, Larry, is because I want people who may come after you and I, after we're no longer here, I want them to understand from people who are over there what it was like, what that time was like, what that area of the world was like, what it was like, what the Vietnam era was like. So what do you hope that people remember about Vietnam when they look back and they listen to your story and your other veteran stories?
Well, probably that, I guess because I was never in country, we had a change of command ceremony in Vung Tau, and that was the only time that I ever set foot in Vietnam. But for people, especially people aboard the ships, and it might be different from like aircraft carriers who actually sent planes over in there to do bombing, that we really, as the general rule, we weren't the horrible people that they had us pegged to be. That we just an everyday. If you saw me in civilian clothes out on the street, you would never know me from anybody else. And if you even talked with me, you would never know that I was over in Vietnam or over close to Vietnam for a good portion of my military time.
Yeah. Is Vietnam something that you talked about after you came home?
I didn't. Not much.
Why?
Probably just too caught up in life. I probably told my wife a little bit from time to time if she had any curiosity about my time in the military. And in fact, I still do from time to time. I'll think of something that I did over there. There's one funny story I have to tell before we're all done.
Sure,
and
go ahead.
This, I mentioned at the very beginning that the ship was not designed with enough crew spaces in mind, and so we were moved to a troop space. And so at first I was kind of upset that, hey, with the crew spaces, we had lockers underneath our bunks. You could just lift up the bunk and there was all your stuff. Well, we got moved over, excuse me.
You bet.
We got moved over into that troop space, and we had upright lockers like you'd find in a gym. Well, I guess it was just when they said, you're being moved over into troop space, and I thought, really? I didn't want to give up my crew space. Well, when we got over there and I saw these upright lockers in there, I thought, hey, I can actually hang up my clothes. This is not so bad. And because there wasn't a lot of us that were in this space, it was a bigger space than what the people. I think we were in with the quartermasters. I think it was just the signalman, the quartermasters. I think the radarman and the radioman got to stay in the crew space, and the rest of us got sent over to a troop space. So there were probably at least a dozen bunks that were empty in there. We just didn't fill it up. And so we each got 2 lockers, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to hang all of our clothes up in there. Well, these bunks in there were hoop type. They were a metal frame, like a pipe frame, and then they had a canvas in the middle with ropes tied all the way around this piece of canvas, and then probably about a 2-inch thick is all mattress in there. And they were 3 high. Well, the highest one if I remember right, it was just about eye level, that bunk. So you had to kind of jump up in there, and then the bottom one was only like this far off the floor. And so they had speakers all around the compartment, but like, I think there was only 4 of them in there, and I happened to be pretty close to one. Well, one time we left the Philippines, headed to Taiwan. Well, actually, I should say headed towards, because we never made it there. Taiwan for liberty. And how the Navy, that just really slays me. How the heck the Navy did not know that typhoon was between us and Taiwan, I'll just never know. But we ran smack dab into this typhoon. And if you've ever seen the show The Perfect Storm, we had waves 90 feet high. And the reason why I know this is because we had to stand watches. We couldn't stand them on any weather decks, but we had to go up to the bridge where the helm was and everything to stand our watches. Well, I looked out at this bridge, and in the daytime, these waves were the same height as the top of those derrick arms. And because I knew that they were 90 feet high, we had waves just literally, we would punch through the waves, and it was like a torpedo. We'd just punch right through the waves, and the top of the waves would be splashing over the top of the derrick arms. Well, so I don't remember how long this went on, but these big, huge bow doors that were on the front, they had humongous dogs, kind of like a ratchet that you, and they dogged them together. Well, the pounding of the sea just pounded on them until they started loosening up, until they loosened up to the point where they swung open, and the sea literally just tore them right off the ship. They just swung out and just, and so then we had ocean start coming into the front of the ship, and down into our tank deck. And I just remember it was at night that when we would hit these waves, if it was something coming out of Hawaii hitting those waves, that was like child's play compared to going through 90-foot waves.
Yeah.
And I remember hitting those waves, and it was like we would be running into a 6-foot thick brick wall every time. And it would just boom, and it would just shake the whole ship. And I just kept thinking, this thing is just going to fall apart.
Right.
And so I was down in my rack, and I purposely took a middle rack. I didn't like to have to swing myself up to the upper rack, and I didn't want to be down on the bottom. A few things happened to the people that slept on the bottom rack, so I chose the middle rack. Some of the guys wanted to be up off the floor, so they chose the upper racks. Well, so I remember the captain coming over the 21MC, that's the internal speaker system, and he says, now hear this, now hear this. We are about, and I don't remember the exact terminology, but it was something like about ready to come about. And I was awake enough, because I just wasn't, with all the pounding and everything, I just wasn't hardly sleeping at all. And so I heard this loud and clear, and I'm thinking, whoa, this can't be good. Right. I had been in small boats to where when you start, if the waves were any kind of big at all, you start to turn around, well, that boat's going to come up on the side. And so I thought, whoa. I had heard that this ship could go completely over and it would right itself again. But I thought, are we going to really test this thing out? Right. And so I remember we started to come around, and that ship, they said from the bridge, they had a roll meter up there, and they said that it did a 45-degree roll. And then when that wave passed underneath, the ship really, it did snap. It was not just a real gradual roll. It snapped back. And when it snapped back, the people that were on that particular side of the ship, and I think it was the starboard side because they think we came about to the right, they came flying out of their racks, the ones that didn't hear the message, and they would hit these upright lockers, and so you'd hear bam, 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 hitting these upright, and then a thud, and then a lot of swearing going on. and then the same thing when it happened the other way and the ship snapped back the other way, the people on the other side of the compartment, they'd come flying out of their racks because it happened so fast. And they would hit the upright lockers and start swearing. And I'm just landing because I just turned over and I thought, we're going upside down. And I locked my hands around my rack. And I thought, I'm hanging on for dear life.
So it was a ride.
It was a ride.
How long did it take you to get out of that?
I would say probably several minutes before we finally was able to get completely doing a 180 and going with the waves. And when we started going with those waves, it felt like we were riding on air. It was so smooth. But we had to end up going back to the Philippines and have a new set of bow doors made up. Took them like a month to make up a new set of bow doors for us out of scratch.
Wow. Because they'd been so ripped up, battered apart.
They were gone. They were just at the bottom of the ocean. They didn't even try to find them.
Right. Wow. So what other, we've talked about a lot of things. What other stories have I missed? What have I not touched on?
You know, I'm trying to think of some of the stories that the only that one landing, that beach landing that we did, that was pretty neat. Coming into the shore, having never done that before, never been that close to a shore, for one thing, in a big ship, and I thought we're going to get grounded because I had found out that one of the COs of an older LST had broached the ship on the shore. The older ones, I don't know if they had, the ship that we were on had a bow thruster partway back from the bow, and it was parallel with the ship. And so as they were coming into the shore, they could actually maneuver the bow one way or the other to be able to make sure to get lined up. Right. Well, he might have been on an older LST and that might not have had that feature. And so he actually broached the ship sideways and it was pretty embarrassing. But another time I do remember, it was in I believe Yokosuka, Japan, that we had come in for Liberty, and we had tied up to a pier. Well, a little Japanese subchaser pulled in behind us, and they were pretty close behind us. So I don't know, this CO that we had, I think that was one of 2 times that this happened, or something similar. We started getting underway, and I don't know whether it was the helmsman's fault or whether it was the CO's fault, given the wrong order, or whether it was maybe the XO. I don't even know. But I just remember that we started getting underway, and I don't know how they didn't know that this little Japanese subchaser was behind us, but we backed into it. I mean, we hit it pretty hard. And it was being a signalman when I got to see it all. And that was another thing about being a signalman. All these guys come out of these little hatches down out on the deck like a bunch of ants coming up out of there, because I mean they thought, what the heck?
Right.
And to make matters worse, even though we hit that thing, we got underway and we're started out of the harbor, and here come the harbor patrol. It was like the cops pulling us over. They made us go back into the pier and tie up again, and we were there for like 12 hours more, getting all this paperwork probably
ironed out between the 2 countries.
The same CO, when we were coming into 32nd Street there at San Diego one time, again, knucklehead. You're supposed to come in, the pier's here, you're supposed to come in and kind of gradually come on in alongside of it. Well, he came in at almost like a 45-degree angle, and there was a big brow that was sitting there on the pier. That you would put across to climb up the stairs, and it was pretty tall. If I remember, I was like 15, 20 feet high. He come in and he hit this thing with the front of the ship and knocked the thing over, bent it all up, and hit the pier, put a big gouge in the wood that was there at the pier.
Wow. So it's not always smooth like it's in the movies.
No. It wasn't always like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, anything else that I'm missing?
As far as active duty, probably not so much. Well, once we got back to the States, and I had a 6-year obligation, so I finished out the other 2 years, and then I got out for a little while, and then I went back in again. And when I went back in, then I got in. I had to cross-rate the second time because there really was nothing for me to do as a signalman. We didn't have any ships down at North Park, so well, actually they did. They had a funny-looking old like a paddle wheel type of a ship back there, but anyway, so I had to cross-rate, and because I had always wanted to be a CB, I cross-rated and got into the CBs as an equipment operator, and so I went ahead and I did my time. I did 2 years there, and at the end of that 2-year enlistment, I got out and went right directly into the National Guard, and I was going to go through the National Guard as on brother duty with my younger brother, and we were going to be going through OCS. Well, that is one of my big regrets in life, is that I did not go ahead and go through with OCS like I originally planned to. I did a annual training over in Fort Gowan over by Boise, and my main thing that I thought about while I was over there was to study the officers, and I did my best to just focus way more attention on those guys than I normally would have, because at that time I was going to go through OCS. I even had to get a age waiver because I was too old, and I just made the determination that I just didn't think that I had what was needed to be an officer. So I backed out, and so I did 3 years in the National Guard. It was a 4-year enlistment. I didn't realize I had signed up for 4 years, so I only did 3. And then I think I was only out for about a year after that, and then I went back into the Navy Reserves, and Doug mentioned Dwayne Dittmer. He was the recruiter down there, and he says, "Larry," he said, "I got to tell you," he said, "you can't just keep getting in and out and in and out." He said, "This is it." He said, "You've been out a couple different times already and gone back in." He said, "You need to stay in this time." He said, "Otherwise, if you get out one more time, they're probably not going to let you back in." And so 12 years, I stuck it out and retired in 98. And this is a picture of me when I retired in 98. They say the 6 hash marks, 4 for each year, 24 years total. And then this is a picture, one of 2 of the shadow boxes that I made up for my retirement with my rate insignia and the battalion the company we were in. And then this is the National Guard insignia that I wore when I was in the Guards, and just the different things I wore on the dress uniforms. And then picture me, the big picture being in the Navy. And then this is the last thing I have here. This is the plaque that I got when I got out in my retirement. I got a bunch of pictures here, but but anyway, I was kind of glad to get out. I was like Doug. We were higher tenured at 24 years as a first class. I took the test for chief 3 or 4 times. I P&A'd, passed but not advanced. No college education, so I just you needed at least a couple years of college really to make chief, and so I finally just said, okay. Well, being I was in the National Guard, I went over. I was kind of mad because they were booting me out, and this hadn't been like this much more than about a couple years before I retired. They just started that. So I went over to the National Guard and I said, "Hey, if I come back into the National Guard, could I get my E7?" And they said, "You probably could." They said, "If you want to come back in," they said, "you can probably go ahead and make what would it be, Sergeant First Class." And so I said, okay. Well, just about that time, everything kind of went crazy over in Iraq and all that. And I talked it over with the wife, and I said, "What do you think? Should I go ahead and go back into the National Guard?" And she said, "Well, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want." And I said, "I don't think I will." So I didn't.
Okay. That's a long, 24 years. I think one of the things that's amazing is the service that you gave, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for serving. I also want to say thank you for being a part of this series and coming here and talking. I couldn't do this series. We couldn't do it without you.
Well, thank you.
So I want to thank you. I want to thank folks who have been listening, too, for joining us and for supporting this series. This has been Daryl Ehrlich. This is the Vietnam Voices series, a project by the Billings Gazette. I've been here with Larry Armstrong, who's been in the U.S. Navy. In fact, several different hitches, 24 years service when he was over in the South Pacific from 1970 to 74. And again, thanks so much, Larry, for joining me.
Well, thank you.